Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Do we have anything that we would like to add to the posted Planning Commission agenda? Okay, before we move forward to approve the minutes, I just want to remind everyone in person to make sure they signed in outside. There's a sign-in sheet just to the left of the door as you come in. Okay, so now we'll move on to line item 2. Can I have a motion to move to approve the Planning Commission minutes from the last meeting in July?
So moved.
Can I have a second? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. Okay, the ayes have it. We'll move forward to line item 3, which is public comment. Does anyone from the public have a comment for something that is not posted on tonight's meeting agenda? If you have anything that you would like to say regarding something posted on tonight's meeting agenda, we just ask that you hold those comments until we get to that in our meeting agenda this evening. Anyone on Zoom that has anything that they'd like to say about something that's not posted on tonight's meeting agenda? Okay, we will now move to item 4, which is a sketch plan for the Stevenson Road property and the Lutheran Church. I will let staff bring us up to speed on this, and I just want to remind everyone that we are reviewing a sketch plan, and we are not taking any formal action on this. We're just reviewing the sketch plan.
Correct. So HRG has submitted a sketch plan for the Emmanuel Lutheran Church, and it is a voluntary process that we allow here at the township. No formal action can take place, so anything that is discussed tonight is not binding. It's just a first glance for you to put eyes on whatever they have proposed. So Steve is with us from HRG.
Hello, my name is Steve Kirsch. I am with HRG. We prepared the study as discussed. Also with me is Steve Ford, representing the church as the developer. Steve's going to start out with the conversation about how we got to this point with the project.
Okay, so in addition to Steve, our pastor, Logan Wilmoth, is here. Three of us representing the church. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to give a quick background about the church and what our plan is here. Emmanuel's a newer church in town. We we started in 2015. We've been worshiping at Albright Bethune, a United Methodist Church in town since that time. And we've been looking to get our own property and or building as we've grown. In late 2022, property on the drawing here at the corner of Stevenson Road and North Atherton Street became available. And actually, a couple who are members of our church took a leap of faith and went ahead and actually purchased the property, because to get approval through the congregation and all would take a long time, and we knew obtaining property is really challenging. So they actually went ahead and purchased the property. It's about 10 acres at the corner of Stevenson Road and North Atherton Street. Basically, if you go down past Home Depot, it's at the bottom of the hill there. With the property, the church wanted to investigate whether it was going to be a viable property for us to build a church on. So we retained HRG to do basically a feasibility assessment to determine whether it would be appropriate to build a church building. The criteria that we asked them to use was for a sanctuary that would support 150 people. We ultimately would like to have some classroom and fellowship space. The other idea, kind of a longer-term idea, is that in some years we might consider particularly an after-school daycare, preschool, something like that, and do that for about 50 children. HRG concluded that the property is suitable for construction of a church. From a zoning standpoint, the property is A1 rural, but it's also in the I-99 overlay district. Use of the property for a church and school it falls within the conditional use requirements of zoning, and so we would, at this point, we believe we fall within those constraints and would need concurrence from the township. HRG looked at building setbacks, different things like that, and everything was okay that way. If you want to go on to the next page, I'm not sure who's... So things we looked at, wanted to get understanding on is the availability of utilities. There is no public water at the property right now. The Ridgemont development is the closest area with public water. It's about 2,000 feet away from the property. We did speak to the Borough Water Authority about, the idea of running a water line. They said the most likely route would be along North Atherton Street, and the fellow I spoke to, and I can't remember who it was, said you're probably looking at $750,000. I mean, just a large amount of money because it would be running along Atherton Street. In looking at property lines, if we were to run, off of Atherton Street, there doesn't seem to be an easy way to run a water line. So at this point, our expectation is that we would install a water well on the property. From the standpoint of sewer, kind of the same thing. There is no sewer currently available on the property. There were perk tests done on the property by the prior property owner back in 2022. The perk test indicated that the site could be suitably used with an on-site septic system. At the same time, I think it was in April of this year, our member received a letter from UAJA indicating that they are considering running a sewer line along the creek stream that's on the property, just alerting them, as well as I assume other neighbors along that line of that possibility. We understand that the property is outside of the regional growth boundary right now. If that sewer line were run along the property, if that would happen, the church would certainly be interested in connecting to that. Our understanding is there would have some exception or approval required from the township, UAJA, to allow us to connect to that, and I'm not sure the details of that, but that's something that certainly is of interest to us as a possibility. From a road access standpoint, the expectation is that we would access the property from Stevenson Road, and because it's a PennDOT road, we would have to get what we expect is a low-volume driveway permit to access the property based on the number of people that we would expect to be worshiping on the property. We did ask HRG to do a wetland survey on the property because of the stream and creek that's running through the property. It is an intermittent stream. Earlier this year, there was water flowing, but I can tell you in June when the wetland survey was done, there was no water flowing on the property. So it really is an intermittent stream. But the results of the wetland survey were that there are no regulated wetlands on the property. The other thing that we had done was basically a test pit survey. One of the things that HRG found when they were doing the site assessment was that when I-99 was constructed, I guess the front portion of the property was used by PennDOT. We're not 100% sure whether it was as a stormwater basin or as a laydown area for equipment, whatever, but we wanted to make sure that, we weren't looking at, big chunks of concrete, rock, whatever else might have been placed on the property. We did 13 test pits across the property, and we did not find anything that was a significant problem that would prevent us from moving ahead with putting a church on the property, so that was good. So with all of that information, HRG did prepare some basically conceptual plans on where a church and other items could be placed on the property. And if we can scroll down to maybe the first of the two drawings that HRG did. So basically, it's a little hard to see the brown area. Here was one potential location for a church building. This was identified again in the sketch, and these are just conceptual for a parking lot, septic drainage areas, possibly here or here, and I think this was even an alternate area, and then stormwater basin, possibly here. The blue line here is, well, no, I'm sorry, this is the line where the creek bed runs through right now, and then these were the setbacks off of the creek and whatnot. So that's one of the concepts. Then if you go to the next drawing, very similar, but just moving the building forward, you know, more on the front of the property along with the parking. Again, these are conceptual and just as a starting point. I don't know if you want to add anything else on that, Steve. Okay, all right. So those are the basic concepts and ideas that we have. We are early on in the process. We purchased the property in June, and we're looking to take steps forward. I spoke to Nicole Harder about the idea of, we would like to put a sign on the property in the near future, just saying this is a future location for Emmanuel Lutheran Church. And the suggestion was that we present the sketch plan to the Planning Commission and the supervisors so that you're aware of it. If questions arise, you're not blindsided, well, I don't know anything about that. But these are the ideas that we have. At this point, we're probably planning to retain the services of an architect, a land planner, probably HRG, and move forward with the early stages of design. Realistically, I would say the earliest that we would potentially be looking at construction would be 2025 and possibly into 2026. So that's kind of an idea of the timing that we're looking at right now. So we're looking for your comments, questions, any thoughts that you have about what we're thinking of right now.
I have a question. So for each individual drawing, do you know the approximate feet or yardage that it's set, like where your entryway is set back from Atherton?
I don't have that. I'll let Steve.
No, I don't know the numbers offhand. I know the red line is the overlay district boundary setback.
I mean, it's certainly hundreds of feet. The concept one, which is the one where the building is further back, I think I'm sorry, is about 900 feet long. And so I'm guessing, the driveway entrance with concept one, just as I look at it, rough scale, is probably 600 feet or something like that.
600 or 700, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And as we look at this, I think, one of the thoughts we have as a congregation, it might make sense to have two entries into the property, one that maybe would be a primary entrance and the other an exit. But again, these are all details that we're just scratching the surface on.
Okay. That's a good idea, actually, to have two, I think.
Anyone else on the Planning Commission that has any comments or questions?
My only comment is between the two, number one's my preference, so further away from North Atherton.
And I suspect that's probably the direction that we'll go for a variety of reasons. There is some road noise along the property. Inside a building probably wouldn't get a whole lot. But I suspect, but again, we need to work with the architect and the HRG to see what makes the most sense. I don't know what information you might have as far as the sewer line. I don't know what engagement you've had with UAJA. We just know, I had spoken to UAJA back at either the end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023, just asking about sewer, and at that point they said it's very unlikely, but then the property owner received this letter in April indicating that I guess an option that they were considering was running along the creek on our property and down basically the property owners along Stevenson Road, and so we've heard nothing beyond that initial information. So I don't know if you guys have any additional info that you can share.
So sewer is a regional process within the center region. It's not something that UAJA can grant. Sewer is actually planned for by all 6 of the municipalities within the center region. So being outside of the regional growth boundary, there is a process called a development of regional impact that you would have to go through. It's a pretty lengthy process because it goes through, first you come to the supervisors and ask for their support. If they support it, then you have to produce a report that looks at all the possible impacts of extending public sewer to the property. Then it goes to the CRPC, the Center Region Planning Commission, for their opinion on it, their recommendation, comes back to the supervisors, and then eventually goes back up to the general forum, and 5 of the 6 municipalities must approve of the request. So we're talking, could be up to 6 months, if not more, to get the request taken care of. So, and UAJ, they can send letters all they want, but they can't, without the municipality signing off on it, they can't change that growth boundary nor just run sewer. So I would say at this point, the better option for you is if you have on-lot septic, that's, sites that are feasible, you might want to consider those for now.
We're assuming that, and knowing that we're several years out from, when we're actually going to be developing the property, it's like, okay, if that were an option, that would certainly be favorable to us. If it's running across our property, obviously running a line to the sewer would be easy. But since it's not in the regional growth boundary, I guess we would have to go through those steps, and it may or may not be feasible or possible. So,
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay. Other question that we have is regarding, we're going to have this property. We're starting to do some mowing, and probably later this fall we'll start, there's a lot of scrub brush on the property, and we'll probably start just doing some general clearing of that. At some point, we might want to have very occasional service out there, or possibly a picnic or something. I mean, it's so rough right now that it's not going to be easy. One of the issues we've got to deal with is access to the property, but I don't know if you all have comments, concerns about that. It would truly be an occasional kind of thing.
None here.
I'm sorry?
None here.
Okay.
From a zoning perspective, that probably would not be permitted, just because you do not have an approved land development plan.
Okay, I mean, there wouldn't be any land development per se.
Understood, however, you wouldn't even have your HOP from PennDOT. So you wouldn't be able to access that without having a driveway entrance to that property.
So if we, I don't know, and Steve and I haven't talked about this, whether there's like a temporary driveway that could be put into the property in the interim.
That would be something you would have to deal with PennDOT, because Stevenson Road's PennDOT. So they would have to be the one to issue that.
Okay, all right.
The question, if it was like the people they purchased it from, if they wanted to have a picnic on their land, would they be allowed to do that? So it was the residents who purchased that, who owned that land. If they wanted to have a picnic there, couldn't?
But you don't have a primary use established.
So before
Anything can be done, you have to have a primary use established.
So even if you owned it and it was your lot and you,
Correct.
so you couldn't have like a family reunion there?
No.
So their next steps then would be to go to PennDOT directly?
They would have to go to PennDOT directly to get their, either the general HOP for the site, or whether or not they would grant a temporary driveway access.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments or questions for us?
No, so you'll be going to the board meeting on August 16th?
Okay. That's the plan at this point.
Yep, you're
Yeah.
on the agenda, yep.
Okay.
And then to kind of go over the same thing with them. So
Yep.
thank you for coming in.
Okay. Well, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to do this. If there are other questions or comments that come up afterwards, please let us know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think from a planning commission perspective, the only comment is if we could keep in mind to move it further away from North Atherton.
Yeah, it's just because of traffic.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
right. So,
Nothing else, there's about 150
yeah.
people leaving all at once.
right,
Jam
exactly.
up Stevenson at North Atherton.
Right, yeah. Okay, so I guess that's really the only comment to move forward to the board. Okay, great. So then the next thing that we have on our agenda is 160 Clearview Avenue rezoning request. Kind of similar to what we did with some other line items. I think the format that makes the most sense for this is to have staff talk about some of their thoughts. After our last meeting, we asked them to do a review of things. And then I think the next thing that makes sense is for our planning commission to make comments, and then we'll move forward with comments from the general public. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Leslie, and we'll hear what you have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay. So back in May of 2023, Patton Township received a request from HFL Corporation to consider.
Move the microphone closer. Is that better?
Okay. So back in May, the township received a request from HFL Corporation to consider rezoning 160 West Clearview Avenue, which is in Patton Township, State College, Pennsylvania. The property is currently zoned R2. It's low-density residential. The letter is requesting a change to R3 medium-density residential to accommodate a proposal of a 31-unit, 55-plus attainable housing community. The Patton Township Board of Supervisors referred the rezoning request to the Planning Commission in June, and in July, the Planning Commission referred the request to staff for a full analysis, and that is what is being presented this evening. Starting with the site, the 160 West Clearview Avenue is a 2.5-acre parcel. The property is currently owned by Seven Mountains Media, LLC. Just as a note, the request that was submitted with the rezoning for the 31-unit, 55-plus attainable housing, if this property is rezoned, any use that's in the R3 zoning district is eligible. It cannot be tied to the 55-plus 31-unit attainable housing community. So just keep that in mind as we're talking this evening. This parcel is currently a broadcasting radio station, which is not a permitted use in the R2 zoning district, so it is considered to be non-conforming. The current parcel has 22 parking spaces, and based on this map right here, with rough GIS calculations, it has a 13% impervious coverage. Hold on, my mouse isn't working. There we go. 13% impervious coverage. So that includes the building, the sidewalk, and the parking area. Just to orient you to the site, here is a view looking from the intersection of Clearview Avenue and Clearview Avenue and Wattle Road. This is the current Seven Mountains Media building. It is bordered by single-family residential, which you cannot see because of the buffer to the left of the screen, and you can see the Bryn Student Housing Apartment Complex to the rear of the building. The Bryn is currently zoned R3, abutting the property. The adjacent single-family houses that you cannot see behind the buffer are R2. Here's another view looking from the Brand apartment complex to the back of the building that's on the site. Here's a view of Clearview Avenue from the front door of the Seven Mountains Media Building. And here is a view of the intersection that could be impacted. This is Wattle Road and Clearview Avenue. Just to note, this is a view of Wattle Road from the site, from the parking lot. This is really the only place on the site that there's any grade change, and we'll come back to this, but it's about a 4 to 5 acre slope, or I'm sorry, 4 to 5 foot difference in slope from the top of the bank, and there's a guide rail along Wattle Road here. That would be the only topographical issue that could come about, and we'll talk about that later. But I wanted to show this slide. The site, just a little bit of history. The parcel was subdivided back in 1965. It was originally part of a 345 acre farm. And if you look at this, if you can see my mouse here, at the top of the site, well, okay, so in the top left-hand corner, there's a parcel that's carved off. It doesn't quite look like the rest that are adjacent to it. That is the Seven Mountains Media site. It's been a broadcasting facility for, it looks like, 6 decades. The rest of the parcel was subdivided a little bit at a time, but this is the only plan that we could find that shows the original farm and where those buildings were. Just for reference, Clearview Avenue is located at the top, and you can see those parcels that are carved off that are still in existence today. At the bottom, that roadway, it was originally called University Drive, and today it's been slightly realigned, but that's Viral Boulevard. The site is predominantly open with grass coverage, minimal landscaping, and a narrow buffer yard of unmaintained trees and shrubs along the northeastern property boundary. The site is located within the regional growth boundary and in the sewer service area. The neighborhood is very sensitive, so we want to make sure that everyone is aware that we are cognizant of that fact. The variety of uses that surround the parcel, though, is very intriguing for this rezoning request. There is close proximity to retail centers and jobs. There's access to public transit. There's a cattle line that runs adjacent to the property, which we'll talk about in a little more detail later, and it has ample access to parks. It's very centrally located. Just as a reference, due to the constraints, or due to the fact that there really are no neighborhood constraints, minus the fact that the site is sensitive, and that the parcel does not meet the surrounding parcels in size, layout, or use, there is no limitation from that aspect for rezoning it to R3 or keeping it R2. So from a physical features perspective, we're going to start with soils, because my thought is that every great design should always start with a soils analysis. This site has a Hublersberg silt loam soil. It is moderately suitable for transportation and for dwellings, and the reason for that is the shrink swell potential and possible sinkhole formation. And if you note Hublersberg silt loam, you'll find that quite extensively throughout Patton Township. So from that perspective, there's not really any significance between R2 and R3. For topography, it's minimal. There's approximately 18 feet of grade change from the top right corner of the parcel to the bottom left corner of the parcel. There's no surface hydrology that's located on the site, so there's no wetlands, there's no stream, there's no surface water whatsoever. It does drain into the Spring Creek watershed, which ultimately drains into the Chesapeake Bay, but from a topographical perspective, there's not a lot of grade change that would affect the site. I do want to point out that there is a swale along Wattle Road. That's that 4 to 5 foot drop that I had mentioned before. If there was the need to put a sidewalk along there, it would provide a challenging design exercise, but it would not make it impossible. As far as vegetation goes, the site is predominantly covered in perennial grass seed. There are a few white pine trees that are located along Wattle Road. There's some maple trees and some ornamental flowering trees of some sort along Clearview Avenue that are located in various clumps. There you can see them in this picture here. The residential properties to the northeast of the site are buffered by spruce and some deciduous in evergreen shrubs. There is some landscaping that exists around the building. It is primarily hedgerows of yews with some barberry and some ornamental grasses mixed in. The swale, the steep incline, and the guide rail propose a challenge to accommodate a future sidewalk and to potentially put stormwater infrastructure adjacent to Wattle, but this does not cause any significant physical constraint that would limit the use of this property for either R2 or R3. Moving on to infrastructure. Again, this is located in the center region and in the regional growth boundary and sewer service area. So there are a variety of utilities and amenities that are available at this site. There's a 6-inch sewer lateral that already services the site. There's 12-inch and 8-inch mains for water that are adjacent to the site, and there's aerial power poles. All of the utilities have the capacity to serve this site. If this property was developed to house more than one building, it would require a sewer lateral to be upgraded. I know that traffic is on everyone's mind, so we're definitely going to spend some time talking about transportation tonight. We have 2 data sets here for crash data. I was able to find, well, I had a bunch of people helping me with this. Let me be clear. I had some colleagues pull some crash data from PennDOT and from the LRTP for 2015 and 2019. Adjacent to the site, there were 2 reportable in that crash data set. But Patton Township Police Department, Chief Jolly also pulled data for me, and there were 4 reportables. There's a rubric in the report that's in your agenda packet that gives some specifics on that crash data. There was 1 pedestrian involved in that. Most of them were rear ends. They were distracted drivers, angled crashes, things like that, but those were all reportables. The traffic corridors. Wattle Road has a significant amount of average daily traffic. It connects Toft Tree's development to the I-99 interchange, and it traverses along the edge of Williamsburg Square, Woody Crest, and other residential developments, as well as the Walmart Shopping Center and the Bryn Student Complex, which ends at Viro Boulevard. Here's a view. The sidewalk is not consistent. The width of Wattle Road is variable, as is the right-of-way. And if you can notice on this isn't a great picture, but the sidewalk runs along the Bryn apartment complex, and it stops just short of the property line of the Seven Mountains Media site. There is a sidewalk adjacent to the Walmart property, if you look to the right of the picture, that runs the full length of the block between Clearview Avenue and Viro Boulevard. Here's another view of Wattle Road, just showing the linkages. Clearview Avenue only carries 1,000 to 2,500 ADT. The corridor connects North Atherton Street through the Woody Crest residential development and across Wattle Road through some smaller residential neighborhoods and ends at the Oakwood Plan community at the intersection with Oakwood Avenue. This also varies in width and right-of-way. It's predominantly lined with single-family, 1-story dwellings with garages. Along this corridor between Wattle Road and the next block, it is a consistent 30-foot setback. There is no sidewalk along either side of this street. There's also no parking along any of these sections. Here's another view of Clearview Avenue. The traffic counts that are included in your report are just forecasting. They are not actual. So running these numbers, I had some help with this too. If you take the existing average daily trips from the radio station, considering that to be a small office building, the average daily trips are about 80. If you didn't do anything tonight, you did not choose to move forward with the rezoning request and it stays R2, if this property was redeveloped, you can get approximately 9 units on this site. It would be very tight, very tricky, because there's a lot of requirements for how the lot can be subdivided, but 9 is the max. That's the number we're going to work with tonight. For R2, that would be your max build out for single family. That would generate about 90 trips. If you build out for R3, which is also allowable as a single family, you can get between 9 and 12 units on the site as single family. I'm not sure how you could fit the 12 on there. Somebody really creative might be able to make it work, but it's just a very tight site. So we're going to stick with 9 for that as well. That would generate 90 daily trips. The proposal, which again, you can't tie this to this rezoning request, but we're using it as an example. If you put 31 units in an apartment-style complex on this site, it would generate approximately 140 trips. Worst case scenario, if you rezone it R3, they're allowed to do any use in the R3 district. The worst case scenario, and I'm not saying this from a land development standpoint, I'm just saying this from a traffic perspective. The most traffic would be caused by townhouses, and that would be 210 trips per day. I want to emphasize that a traffic impact study would be required if there was any significant development to this site. The reason being is Chapter 153 and Article 6, the Transportation Impact Report requirements, it's usually triggered by 500 trips per day unless the projected level of service of the roadway system adjacent to the development is significantly affected, if the sensitivity of the adjacent neighborhood is in question, if there's a proximity issue to existing site driveways and intersections, and ability of the adjacent existing or planned roadway system to handle increased traffic is in question. So those things would trigger a traffic impact study. I want to stress that if any traffic impact analysis shows that an alternative mitigation measure needs to be implemented, the cost becomes the responsibility of the developer. Talking about vehicular circulation, it would be advised to relocate the entrance as far away from the intersection as possible. This site, whether it's R2 or R3, needs to meet all of the subdivision and land development ordinance requirements. One of those is the max impervious coverage, and I do think there's a section in the zoning that talks about this as well. For R2, it's 25%. For R3, it varies between 25 and 35%. So if you remember from one of the previous slides, I had broken out what the impervious coverage was for the building, the sidewalk, and the parking lot. That's approximately 11%. So if you can imagine doubling that, that would be the max that would be allowed, roughly, just from an aerial view. That would be approximately the max that would be allowed to be built on the site. So that doesn't matter if you're putting 9 houses on here or if you're putting a 31-unit apartment building on here. It still has to adhere to those requirements. And one other thing. So for parking, also has to be met. Because there is no on-street parking adjacent to the site, the parking calculator is 2.3. So for example, if you have an apartment building on the site that houses 31 units, you would need to have 72 parking spaces. So the qualifier is 2.3 in this instance. For pedestrian and bike amenities, there is a bike path that is proposed for the corridor along Clearview Avenue. Having a slightly higher density here would make use of that facility, so that could be considered a positive depending on how you looked at this. There is a sidewalk that runs along the perimeter of the Walmart property, which is that lower, larger property where the yellow is. There is a sidewalk that runs along the Bryn, as I mentioned before, but it stops just short of the property line. So that would be a requirement, extending that sidewalk to Clearview Avenue. There is an opportunity also to improve those crosswalks. There is a pedestrian amenity with the traffic signal located there, and the crosswalks do exist, but it's not as pedestrian friendly as it potentially could be. Sorry, I keep skipping ahead. So because the site is well serviced by existing infrastructure, the utilities all have the capacity to serve the additional units at this location. There's really no significant infrastructure constraints that would limit R2 or R3 development. The only caveat that I want to mention is that the sewer would require an upgrade if there's anything more than one building proposed to this site. A sidewalk would be required along Wattle Road, and that all site improvements need to comply with the Saldo ordinance and zoning.
Kristen? Sure. So the sidewalk, and if there needs to be any sewer upgrades, is that paid for by the developer as well?
Yes.
Correct, okay.
Services, again, 160 West Clearview Avenue is located in the center region, so multiple township, regional, and county services are available to all residents living in this neighborhood, including refuse and recycling, bulk waste, code enforcement, libraries, Center County Office of Transportation, and the EMA programs. Highlighting some major services here, and a special thanks to our police department for the pictures. The major service that I want to talk about is CATA, because I think they would be the most significantly affected. This site is located adjacent to a CATA bus route. It runs adjacent to the site along Wattle Road, and it's called the Atherton Connector. It's a popular route, and it runs from Geisinger Scenery Park along or adjacent to Atherton Street all the way to Colonnade Boulevard every half an hour. It takes approximately 32 minutes between the stops. So CATA is generally supportive of this rezoning request and has submitted a letter which has been attached to your agenda packet with comments and recommendations. A couple of things I wanted to highlight. The letter urges consideration of sidewalk facilities along both Wattle Road and West Clearview Avenue frontages. They would ask that a bus stop pad facility be constructed along the Wattle Road frontage of the site, and that accommodations be made for a demand-responsive transit vehicle during the design. So if you are putting an apartment building in here, just to make sure that the circulation permits that in a friendly manner. And also that the project developer would consider partnering with the adjacent property owners in order to establish a corresponding bus stop pad across Wattle Road. Talking about the zoning. So we talked about the radio station being a non-conforming use in R2. So Patton Township does recognize radio and television studios permitted in a slew of other districts, which I outlined in your packet. But what I want to focus on is the purpose of the two residential districts. R2, the purpose, this is directly from the zoning section of the code. The purpose of this section is to regulate residential development of low density on lots of sufficient size to provide for on-site sewage disposal and water and off-site sewage disposal and water. In addition, this district will enable the creation of a buffer zone between rural sections and higher density residential sections. The second one, so that's R2. The second one, the purpose of this section is to regulate residential development in those areas near major highways, commercial areas, and/or centers of employment. Such areas are suitable for medium-density residential development, provided that off-site water and sewer services are provided. However, restrictions are provided to maintain suitable areas of open space between residences to create a suburban atmosphere adequate for family needs. So the question is, which of these definitions does that site fit into? Just to compare the two uses, R2 allows single-family, group homes, and essential services. If you would rezone it to R3, all of these uses would be valid for any sort of redevelopment or land development plan that would come through. They include single-family homes, group homes, two-family semi-detached, duplexes, apartments, and essential services. So those are the differences. They would allow two-family semi-detached, duplex, and apartment. That would be the change. The other changes, and you can see this rubric much better in your agenda packet, would be the minimum lot size. So for R2, the minimum lot size is 10,000 square feet. The minimum lot size for a single-family house in R3 is 8,000 square feet. So comparing apples to apples, single-family, 10,000 square feet or 0.23 acres versus 8,000 square feet for R3. R3 also allows for the apartment style, and if that was the case, there's a whole section on how many units are in each building. So if you have 13 or more units, it would be a 108,500 square foot minimum lot size. So your lot size for this particular property, I apologize, I had it written down, is 108,900. So for them to put a 31 unit house on it, you're getting really close to the maximum lot size right there. There's also a section for townhouses on the far end. So this is where that maximum lot coverage for impervious surface comes in. For low-density residential, so that R2 zoning district, it's 25%. If you would rezone it to R3, it's 35% for the apartments, 35% for single-family, and only 25% for townhouses. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to stress. The building height, there is a maximum building height of 30 feet for R2. It's 35 feet for R3, except for the apartments. That allows it to go up to 60. So I just want you to be aware and keep that in mind.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
What are the tallest buildings in is it the Bryn apartment complex?
That's an excellent question. So they would be allowed to go up to 60 feet. So I'm not sure what their building height is. Do you have any idea? I can find out for you though. I'll make that a note. There were, just as a side note, this is in your packet, but there were a couple of zoning analysis requests done for properties along Wattle Road and Colonnade Boulevard. Most notably in 1999, Colonnade Boulevard and Wattle Road was rezoned from R3 to Office Buffer District. It's now the D. Michael Hawbaker Family Trust Office. It's where Glenn Hawbaker office is. And there was another zoning request in 2009. It was not, no one moved forward with it, but in 2010, 2 of those parcels were rezoned to join that original parcel that was rezoned in 1999. So from this perspective.
You're talking that way, not this way, so we can hear.
Okay. From this perspective, the R3 medium-density residential abuts the property, so it would not be considered spot zoning. The uses of C1 across the street and the variety of uses along Wattle Road lend to a medium-density use buffer between the commercial district and the low residential district housing. And it matches the purpose statement for R3 better than it matches the purpose statement for R2. The comprehensive plan gets a little bit more confusing. So the comprehensive plan we're working with is the 2013 version. In the existing land use section, it's considered communication, so it's labeled purple. But in the future land use, it is labeled commercial office space, which is not even consistent with the zoning. Again, it's a non-conforming use. Well, I shouldn't say every, but a variety of goals and objectives that are listed in the 2013 plan, and I outlined them all in your packet there, it's consistent with. But I just want to stress that it is not consistent with the future land use that is shown in the comprehensive plan. So, summarizing, there's no significant impact to the neighborhood, the physical site, to the infrastructure, to the services, or to the township as a whole if this property was rezoned to R3. The purpose statement of the R3 zoning district matches the site better, and any impacts could be mitigated through sound site planning. An increase in density at this location would provide an opportunity for access to public services, jobs, healthcare, recreation amenities, etc. So based on the analysis that staff has completed, there is no reason not to grant the request to recommend approval of the rezoning to the board. So there is a few comments that were received by the township that had to do with traffic. I tried to go through as much traffic information as I possibly could, doing just a brief analysis. If there is more information that you are requesting, I'm happy to provide that for you. I do believe that there's some folks in the audience who also had some comments. We do, let me see. Chad is here from HFL.
He just stepped down.
Okay, I was looking because I didn't know where he went, but I think there is opportunity to ask questions and hopefully get some answers if
Could I
there's.
ask one quick question?
Sure.
You've used the word sensitive multiple times. I wasn't sure what the definition of sensitive is. Like, what does that mean exactly?
I think In this particular instance, sensitive is one of the criteria for triggering the TIS. It's a mix of uses in an established neighborhood, and just being sensitive of the context of the vernacular, the way the streetscape is laid out, the way the houses are laid out. We just want to make sure that however we go about this site, that we are being sensitive to all of those things.
Sensitive to the way the neighborhood is now versus, I got it.
The way the neighborhood is now versus the way the neighborhood could change based on this zoning change.
Are we thinking about the top trees project as well when we're looking at traffic back and forth on Water Road and where top trees is going to connect?
Well, so every time Toff Trees brings in another significant plan, they're required to do their own traffic impact analysis, essentially, because their traffic needs are very, very different than this site.
But would it impact the exchange on Clearview Avenue?
So we could actually, if, the rezoning were to happen, or even if there's another proposal, land development proposal that comes in under the R2, with the traffic impact study, we can actually meet with the developer and discuss which intersections we want to study and look at to see what kind of impacts the traffic from the additional development would have. So we do have a little bit of leeway in terms of meeting with the developer to try to figure out where we want to study and what intersections we want to look at. Toff Trees is kind of doing their own traffic study. There will be a traffic signal going in at Masters Boulevard Model Road eventually. But yeah, there was a couple of moving parts that can be looked at through this process.
Is there anyone else from the Planning Commission that would like to make any comments before we ask anyone from the general public?
The other question I had to do with your future, the point that you made about the future usage and I guess I'm not, I know that there is a master plan and I know, but I guess I'm not sure how that actually plays out, because when I looked at the documentation you sent in advance, which I think is very good, by the way, it's a good analysis, it made me think, well, if this is going to become even more commercial, or if that's the plan for it, then this is a better option. But how would that happen? Would that go through the same process that we're going through now?
If any of these properties were to be rezoned, it would be the exact same process that we're going through now. So I mentioned that there was a study done back in, I forget what year it was, but that whole corridor between Clearview Avenue and Colonnade Boulevard, 2 blocks worth was studied to be changed to office buffer or to R3. That was what the discussion was, and it was, I didn't get a lot of detail on all of it. I was going back through minutes trying to find it, but that analysis was very comprehensive. So they chose at that time not to do it because they didn't think, I think the reasoning was that it wasn't developed enough yet and that they would revisit it later. But they did come back and then rezone the 2 parcels adjacent to the Hawbaker building. So I don't know where that proposal went after that or who was leading that effort, but I think there's the 2013 comp plan is the one that we're working off of. There's a new comp plan coming, and like I said, that's sort of the vision. That's the big picture goal from a regional perspective of how we're going with land planning. So if this is something that you want to study, that is definitely something we should bring up when we're talking about the comp plan and when you guys are providing input.
Jim? Sharon?
The only comments I have is that I'm not crazy about it, but it's not much else that we can do. Most of my concerns would fall under master plan and land development plan, whether it's R2 or R3.
So I think that some of the core things is, one is, that between this and what's going on at the Toff Trees corridor, as Debbie said, I think, from my perspective, I think that the piece on the traffic impact study is a must. I think the second piece is, I don't want to put words in, I don't live in that area, but I think people like the ability for CATA and the busing and the safety of the sidewalks. So from my perspective, I think the traffic is something that needs to be looked at. I think too is, regardless of if it's R2 or R3, there's just no way that the current sidewalk can stop anywhere where it does currently. That has to be improved, number two. And I think number three is, based on the information provided, I know that people like CATA to be a sincere, feasible option for them in that area. So I think that, that has to be taken into account too. But I think that, I think the traffic piece is something that I think is, as I said before at the last meeting, I think is very important to keep in mind.
So you do have 2 planning commission members on the Zoom if you want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. And
Sorry.
anyone on Zoom that would like to say anything from the Planning Commission on this before we go to public comment?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what to do.
Well, that's fine. I'm going to come back to you, Sharon, for any thoughts, if you'd like to make any.
Well, yeah, I think the height of the buildings, what the maximum height can be is definitely a sensitive subject to the surrounding houses and residences there. The traffic is a huge issue, I think, for people accessing the residences in the neighborhood there. But then, being that it backs up onto that apartment complex too, so I'm kind of mixed as far as, but I think I'd like to know more about the traffic, and I think I'd like to know more about that, what the maximum height could be.
So it could be
60.
60.
60 if it goes R3.
And so I'm trying to figure out what 60 looks at like compared to those apartments that are already there, kind of looking
5
back on that
stories.
neighborhood. Those are 5 stories?
Well, I don't know that they are. 60
I
foot
think
is
those
5
are
stories.
3 stories.
I don't know how high they are. But 60 foot is equivalent to 5-story height building.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot to consider. That's all I have.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anyone on Zoom that has anything else before we take comments from the general public?
I think Mike had, and we couldn't hear him.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that Bill or Brian had anything.
Okay.
Can you pull them back up on the screen?
Yep. Not sure why it didn't stop screen sharing.
Could we defer that and hear from the
Yeah.
Yeah.
folks that are here?
Why don't you do that?
Okay, so now we'll ask if anyone has a comment from the general public. I just want to remind everyone that we just asked you to state your name and your home address in Patton Township, and to please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less.
Can you please
Yeah.
come to the
Come to the
podium?
Podium.
Come to the podium, please.
Just for the minutes.
So you'll be on CNET, sorry.
I'm Sue Herr, 148 West Clearview Avenue. right next to the radio station. When you talked about R3 zoning, the uses that are included under R3 zoning, and you said essential services, what would that include?
Any, like, yeah, like a utility type of a situation. So, like West Penn could come in and put like a little something if they needed a transmitter or something like that. I would have to look it up for exact definition.
I was wondering about churches. Would a church be an essential service?
No, they're along the lines of your utilities, your gas, water, sewer, phone, electric, cable.
Yeah.
That's your essential service.
those
So
types
it
of
wouldn't be
things.
health, like health officer or anything like that?
Oh, no.
Okay. Do you have a definition for that? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lisa Olt, 201 Bolton Avenue.
And Lance Old.
We just have a concern on the amount of traffic that would be generated by something of an apartment complex going in. I know if you change it from R2 to R3, you can put basically anything in that you're permitting at that point, apartment size, very high or low. And we both walk on Clearview Avenue, and we found that it's very peaceful, quiet, and I feel like if you put anything in R3 related, you take away that benefit of Clearview. There's no sidewalks. It's basically not safe to have a lot of people with a lot of traffic.
I usually let her talk because she's smarter than me, but I mean, you have a community here. It is a small community. There's no reason to shoehorn the community. It's already has R3 to the bottom of it, which is fine, but it's very quiet. Everybody gets along. We all speak to each other. We all say hi. Putting this shoehorn in here, adding that traffic, you mentioned it, adding that 250, it is not going to handle it. I mean, it doesn't handle when 4 people leave their driveway at the same time. You can barely drive down the road 2 by 2. And putting that apartment there, you're going to block 2 driveways with 3 cars backed up at that light. And, you know, I just want you to consider this community has been there a long time, and it's good people, and it's just not needed. I mean, I asked the developer to put in some homes, just put in some single-family homes, and because we could use them in State College. You know, we're running short, so thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Larry Parco. I currently reside at 100 East Clearview Avenue. As I mentioned last time I was here, my family and I are not only long-time, we are very long-time residents of this neighborhood. We moved to what would eventually become 142 Clearview Avenue in 1960. Beyond Wattle Road, it was not even an official township road. What would eventually become the media complex was not even there. When it was constructed in 1961 for WRSC, it was nothing more than a concrete block shed and a tower. In 1964, we began construction on what would eventually become our family homestead at 100 East Clearview. We moved during the summer of 1974, so as you can see, our ties run deep. The ambiance of the neighborhood, as the previous commenter said, has always been a major selling point all these 60-plus years. The addition of Coventry Place only added to the ambiance. The calm environment with quiet streets and park areas are important to families, especially those with children. The addition of this complex would severely impact that ambiance in a negative way. Furthermore, additional congestion would be added to the already weak infrastructure system. As has been discussed, traffic is already a problem at Clearview and Wattle. Furthermore, the turning lane sections that have been added in the last few years have done little to alleviate traffic congestion. We don't need more traffic. Things change and progress. That is inevitable. I understand it. Change for the sake of change is not always the proper solution. As was earlier mentioned, this property could become an extension of the neighborhood and a continuance of the ambiance. There is enough space for several single-family dwellings. The impact on the infrastructure would not be nearly as severe. Therefore, I voice my opposition and ask that this request be denied. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Probst, 153 Bolton, one of the adjacent properties. Wanted to quick ask, what was the definition of reportable accidents for the intersection of Clearview and Waddle?
Reportable accidents are when there's a police report filed, essentially.
So only if a police report is filed. Okay. I can say from living at that property for multiple years, even in the last year, I've repeatedly had to take alternate routes around the intersection due to accidents more than 4 times. So while it may not be reported, there's definitely a lot more accidents at that intersection than what your data suggests. I also wanted to raise concern with the regular stormwater that collects on the back of the property. I have seen the stormwater collection in excess of a foot, covering several thousand square feet. So any kind of change to that land would create a significant change in that stormwater draining in that collection area. And as you also proposed earlier, any kind of change to this land would definitely require a sidewalk, as there are regularly pedestrians crossing that property regardless of having a sidewalk or not. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? And if someone wants to come to the microphone, you can go before me. So viably, again, just to reiterate this, how many single-family homes, keeping it at R2, could viably go on that site?
So this is where I talked about it before, so you
Right.
could technically put 9 on there.
9.
But there's a requirement for road frontage.
Right.
So in order to do that, you would almost have to create a cul-de-sac type of a situation to put those 9 houses on there. There's
Okay.
not a really great way to develop that. And there's also a section in Saldo, I'd have to look this up, but I believe there's a section that says that the depth of the lot can't be more than 2.5 times the width, I think. So it's very prescribed on how the lots can be created, if you will.
Where are you putting 9 houses?
That's how many, that's,
Like Coventry Place.
yes. That's what I'm trying to convey. So as it is R2 right now, if they choose not to do the zoning request and it stays R2, they can still put 9 single-family houses on this site. So the question is, do you want 9 single-family?
Where in the road to get out?
They would have to create some sort of entrance drive.
A couple of years ago, they wanted to put
Can you go to
road out
the,
to Waddle.
Yeah, can you please go to the
can
microphone?
you go to the microphone and
That's all.
identify yourself for the minutes?
So if it was denied then, it would be denied now.
Yes, can you please go to the microphone to state your name for the minutes? Thank you.
You're welcome. My name's Karen Henry. I live across from the radio station. Hi. I don't know what I was saying. I wasn't expected to speak up here. Give me some ideas, guys. What's your property value? Will it go down? If I could, yes. Oh, yippee.
No, it shouldn't go down.
I shouldn't.
I mean, I would say that in the last couple of years within the center region, I don't think we've ever seen a property value go down when new development has come in.
And if this property goes through and you have additional amenities because of it, including a CATA stop and pedestrian facilities, that would increase your property value.
We already have that. I mean, CATA stops on real close to all of us right there. Down at Walmart, up at, what's the street name? I should know. Strauss area and Woody Crest. And I don't know why the amenities would be any more than what we have, really. Any other ideas back there? I don't understand why you're destroying a neighborhood that's been there so long. There are many fields and places to put these, these housing, this kind of housing. I'm not against that. I'm against it because it's in a neighborhood that's already been developed, like Larry said, for years and years and years. Do you want one in your front yard? Any of you? Speak up.
We have one.
You do? Enjoyable, huh?
Not a problem.
Oh, good. Especially when it's right on Wattle Road. That's a bad location. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Mike Lebo's been trying to chat, and I can't quite get him.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So if there's
Okay.
any way we can get him up.
Mike, you said?
Where'd he go? Yeah, he's right there.
Okay. Mike?
We can't hear him.
We can't hear him again.
He has mute
Hold on, Mike, we're trying.
It might be a CNET issue, hang on.
Is he a mute on?
He's unmuted.
Try again, Mike.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. Sorry about that.
Okay, my biggest concern is the traffic. Something needs to be widened there. The traffic situation is not good the way it is now. And that's my biggest concern. Plus, the amount of people that we're going to get there, and we do need sidewalks also. I would just vote against this. That's my speech.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned about a wetland, or I think it was you. Did we do any kind of study on if there is any wetlands back there? There was none. How about retention ponds or anything like that?
This site was developed in the 60s, so
Yeah.
there wasn't any formalized stormwater. So there's a low spot in front of the building, and then there's a low spot behind the building where it drains to the back of the site.
Okay.
Those are sort of makeshift stormwater areas, if you will.
Before.
There's a significant amount of water that runs off of those developments that are up there, and there are there's 3 stormwater basins. There's one below Walmart, there's one adjacent to the Med Express TJ Maxx property. There's a couple down there that carry a lot of the stormwater load from these neighborhoods, because there's a significant amount.
Yeah.
So that would be something that would have to be addressed. There would need to be an engineer's review, and all of the reports and such regarding that would have to come through too, making sure that the water is handled correctly.
Okay.
Up until about 2 years ago, there was a big pond in front of the radio station in that dip all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, can I go ahead, Rich? My
Yeah.
name is Beth Royer. I live at 212 Alder Court, so I am closer to the corner of Oakwood and Clearview. Water-wise, I was going to say, we have, which we didn't realize when we bought the house, kind of slopes down, and we had problems with water. Even though we had French drains and everything else, we had to do other work to our yard to stop the water. Next door to us, where they put in Coventry Place, they actually were not going to put a building there because they said it was swampland. There is now a house there. I've asked her, she says she doesn't have water problems, but I wonder. And I know other people in our neighborhood that live up on Clearview, on the other side of Clearview, from where our road comes off, had said they live on swampland. I'm like, we're doomed, because if it's swampland up there and we're lower, and I know there has been water there, so I don't know, it's not something I'm measuring all the time. Anyway, as far as the neighborhood, it is a nice, quiet neighborhood. We, like they said, we have a lot of walkers in that neighborhood. I know people who have come from other neighborhoods because they said our neighborhood was so nice to walk, even though we do not have sidewalks along Clearview, there are other sidewalks. Dog walking, bicycling, which, to tell you the truth, I don't do so much anymore because I am worried about traffic. And I said I'm at the other end of that, and I go up to that light not every day. I work for the school district. When I go up to that light and I have to sit, and even if you're 3 cars back, you can't make that light. So I'm thinking, have to go out around Oakwood and Viro to get out of there if that goes in. All right. I don't really have much else to say other than I know there is a water problem.
Leslie, can I ask you one more question about the stormwater? So you had said it drains off over to like the Walmart area, but like how does it go like into a grate underground, or does it just like go to its lowest area and work its way over?
So here, let me see if I can find a topo maybe. Just pull this up here real quick. So that's not a really great picture, but down here, there is there's a couple of stormwater basins off, so this is the topo map. Off of the site, there's a bunch of stormwater basins down here from the Walmart development and those other things. So usually the water is supposed to saturate the ground and infiltrate through. When it needs to run off in a heavy storm event, that's when you have those BMPs to capture it, to hold it until it can penetrate. There is stormwater infrastructure along the roadways. I saw 2 inlets at the northern part of Clearview Avenue along Wattle Road. But beyond that, I don't remember seeing any other stormwater infrastructure that's developed on the site. Again, this was built in the 60s, so it was just a different way of handling stormwater then.
Well, just a question to the audience out there, the neighborhood. We've probably had 3 significant downpours in the last 24 hours. What are your observations on that? I mean, did you see pooling water anywhere, or did anybody have it pouring into their yards because of this?
Backyards down below that are just soft and wet, every backyard.
Okay.
2 inches of my backyard.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just a sump pump constant running.
So is mine in Park Forest for what it's worth.
You know, a lot of the houses, including mine, up until I had a system put in the house, was my basement filled with water. Yeah, so do my next door neighbors.
Hi, I'm Jen Colwell, 200 Bolton Avenue, part of Coventry Place. I know that a lot of this needs to stay factual as opposed to opinionated based on what you folks are being asked to do. So I really ask you to consider the traffic situation. I don't know if anybody has thought about it, but when I currently sit there in the mornings to go to work, it's about 1 minute and 20 seconds that I sit at that light. And everybody back here can agree, 3 cars maybe get through that light. And I understand that the lights can be adjusted timing-wise. But what I think you're going to see is people go through, trying to think, is it North Allen? And they're going to make a left onto Seymour, and they're going to drive traffic down another street in that development. And I think there are no lights there. People do it all the time now that currently live there, just to be able to make a left turn and avoid that red light. So I'm just asking you to consider more than maybe just that intersection. You had mentioned about looking at the toff trees and that traffic. If you go through Wattle Road anywhere between 2 in the afternoon and 5 o'clock, especially Fridays, and don't even get started on football weekends, it is extremely difficult to get through that intersection as is. So just please, please really consider all the new things that are going in at Toff Trees as well. Because I know they have a light down there that they're going to put in, but that doesn't mean traffic's going to stop going through Wattle Road in our area. So I just ask you to please consider that when you look into that. Thank you.
Now, if this would stay R2, you know, some of the things that have been brought up, like the water drainage, the traffic, can the traffic impacts, if it stays R2, and say hypothetically they put in 9 single-family homes, I'm just saying hypothetically, would that traffic impact study still be you know how you said, Leslie, that if we go to R3, there's conditions that can be set to have that traffic study kick in. If it stays R2 and say hypothetically they put 9 single-family homes in that space, do you still have a purview to have that traffic study kick in to have that take place? Because here's my perspective is, you know, say it stays R2, okay, hypothetically. You know, we still have the water drainage situation, and even if it stays R2, you know, 3 cars in front of you, the traffic, that, you know, that entire situation still stays. So, you know, so from my perspective, R2, R3, these problems need to be addressed in some capacity, and I guess what I'm asking is, you know, how can we balance what all these community members said, and how can we work towards a solution to address some of the things they brought up?
Well, it sounds like traffic's already a problem. So well, from my perspective, that would signify why you would want to do R3, because then you are forcing the developer to fix your traffic problems. If you keep it R2, as I mentioned before, the daily traffic for what it was as a radio station was 80 trips per day. If you change that and you do single family for R2 or R3, and you only do 9 units, there is the chance that you could increase your traffic to 90 trips per day, and that is negligible. I don't know how you can make the argument to do a traffic.
So I would, not to disagree with you, Leslie,
go for
but
it.
I would say that because the ordinance contains some language in it when there's sensitive nature to the neighborhood, and knowing the concerns that we've heard voiced today about the traffic, and I agree with the woman that just said about trying to go on that road on a Friday, especially Football Friday, I would think that that's something we could still look at. Stormwater also is a concern that we can continue to monitor and look at. We have stormwater regulations. Our engineer would have to review any stormwater that would come in associated with this plan. And I would say that if this doesn't move forward, you know, for whatever reason, if it doesn't get rezoned R3 or it stays R2, we could eventually look at, we've been trying to make pedestrian upgrades to some of the other traffic signals along Atherton Street at the Colonnade, some other things. So there'll be another traffic signal coming over to that area anyway. We can certainly look at with our traffic engineer to see what we might be able to do. It is a unique neighborhood in that Clearview Avenue is an older neighborhood, and then there are some newer homes over on the Bolton side. It has a nice unique character to it, but the problem is Wattle Road is a very busy corridor now. It has a lot of commercial along that corridor, and then again with the toff trees at the end of it. So I think that's something that even if this doesn't happen, the township needs to sit and look at the traffic and see what we might be able to do, be it just timing of the lights or some pedestrian safety upgrades, something. Again, that's regardless. If the developer comes in, yeah, we don't have to pay for it then. The developer would be required. But You know, we've made significant improvements into our infrastructure in the township. That's something we can look at. There are grants available. We've always taken advantage of that. So, I mean, I'm hearing, you know, I've been writing down notes as each of you has spoken, and everyone, the common theme is the traffic concern. And I understand that. And I think that there are things we need to do as a township to try to address that, whether we get this rezoned R3 or if it stays R2, whatever happens with that property.
Could somebody go up there and show me how you put 9 houses in?
Well,
So that's not really relevant to the conversation. Like how the site is, how the site is laid out is not really relevant to the conversation. We're talking about what uses could actually be put on the property and what the planning commission and what the board, if this moves up to the board ultimately, will look at is whether they think that's a good fit within the corridor and whether it's a good fit within the zoning. And as the one resident said, we have to look at this from factual-based things. So we're not going to get hung up on what the lots are going to look like. We're not going to get hung up on what if apartments go in, what they would look like. The traffic concerns are very valid. The stormwater concerns are very valid. Those are things that the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors need to consider because they're your representatives.
sir, thank you for your patience.
My name is John Rasm, and my wife and I have lived in 1772 North Allen for the past 13 years. So we've been there when Coventry Place was in its infancy. And the intersection of Wattle Road and Clearview is a terrible intersection. And you've heard previous speakers give examples of that. The one problem that I see that will occur during construction of whatever is going to go in there and subsequent to that, when you're going up Wattle and you want to make a right-hand turn to go Clearview, that's a very, very tight. It doesn't show it very well on the plans, but Wattle makes a bow when it comes up to that intersection. So when you turn right onto the narrow road of Clearview, which doesn't allow parking, as was stated, to make that right-hand turn, the traffic coming against that intersection really has to stop at the site, and it showed it on one of the pictures there. And in the 13 years we've been there, I can say the vast majority of people coming down Clearview do not stop at that stop thing. And so it's very, very difficult to make a right turn if there's a car there. If there's trucks, construction going on, and I can't imagine them even making that turn when a car is parked properly, because even then you have to go very, very slow to make that turn. So that whole intersection, in my opinion, would have to be completely redesigned and so that you can make those turns, because you're going from a wide Wattle Road to a narrow road of Clearview. And that's, again, the traffic problems. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else from the Planning Commission or the general public that has any comments? Can I ask a rep from the HFL to come to the microphone?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
My name is David Durr. I live at 1780 North Allen. I'm a resident of the Coventry Place neighborhood. In my spare time, I also serve Patton Township as a representative to UAJA. My current office is vice chairman. And I am speaking as a resident of the neighborhood, not as an official capacity with UAJA. Okay. The problems with Wattle Road are obvious. My concerns are equally with Crestview. As you know, there are no streetlights whatsoever on Crestview. People routinely walk in the street with dogs on Crestview anytime during the day, also at night. When you do the traffic study, if someone would speak to, say, Patton Township Police Department, they routinely stake out the intersection of North Allen and Crestview, 1 block east of Waddle, constantly looking for speeders and people that just blow through the stop sign. I'm sure something like that does not show up in your traffic reports, in your accident reports, but obviously police officers are assigned there on, I guess, a routine basis, looking for traffic violations. Aside from that, again, Waddle Road problems are very obvious. In my opinion, not one more car should be allowed through there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kathy Durr, 1780 North Allen Street, living in Coventry Place for 14 years. And I want to piggyback on someone saying how, because of that obvious traffic problem, routinely, I just go up Allen and take over to Seymour because of the lighting issues. And if I want to make a right onto Waddle, it's just so much easier. Same thing when I'm coming back, Waddle toward Clearview. It's almost impossible to take a left-hand turn onto there to go home on North Allen. So again, I usually turn left onto Seymour because that's the other thing. If you try to turn left on Clearview from Waddle, people are trying to get around you, and it's one lane. There's no turn lane. So I just think by adding, say, 72 parking spaces, I can't even imagine, and having the additional cars, whether it be single homes or the apartments that they're recommending, it's just going to make the problem that much more difficult, and it's also going to add more traffic to these auxiliary roads like Seymour or going out Clearview to Oakwood and taking that. So you're going to see not only just this one intersection that seems to be noted over and over, but it's these other roads that people are actually going to look around just so they can avoid this hot spot. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
So Lance Holt again, 201 Bolton. What has happened with the traffic and why it's gotten so bad, anybody going east on 322 uses Clearview. They don't drive up to go down Colonnade or even farther to go up to get on to where the Home Depot is. So that's what, and now you're putting Patton Crossing in, and you're going to have, so anybody coming through the sheets, they come down there, they make a left, they go up, and they get 322 east. They don't go down the highway because, I guess, too many lights. So it just gets backed up, and you can't get out of, and again, putting 31 more, because, I mean, it's not going to be 55 and over. They're not going to get the funding. They've already said if they don't get the funding, they're going to go to the low-income housing. And so you're going to have those units there, and it's just going to clog it all up. The community is going to be abolished, and to me, I think the home values will go down because it won't be attractive. It won't be attractive to live there. People will see that when they drive in there.
So I'd like to have Chad from HFL, because you said some stuff that I don't think is correct. So I'd like Chad to address what you just said.
Yeah, Chad Stafford, I'm the civil engineer for HFL. So we have discussed opportunities at the property, if it's rezoned to R3. Specifically, we've talked apartment buildings. We could go the other routes as indicated in the zoning ordinance, whether it's R2 or R3. But we would like to do something like a low-income housing for elderly, we would look at opportunities for that. We would look at opportunities for the PHFA-funded opportunities. We would look at any and all opportunities that we have. It's based upon the market, it's based upon the need, it's based upon what's going on with the development industry at the time we decide we want to develop. So we're not locked into anything specifically. We do have wants and preferences, but we don't know that until we get to the point where we're ready to develop the land. There are a lot of discussions tonight about traffic and stormwater and sidewalks and CATA, and if those items, they're going to need to be addressed, whether it's an R2 development or an R3 development. I do not believe that has anything to do with the rezoning request. I think it has everything to do with the land development process. You guys know, if you look around town, you see what HFL has done, the developments that we're connected to, commercial, residential, all throughout the region. It's a quality product that we put together. And as developers, we're going to do that. And it doesn't matter whether it is elderly age, income restricted, or conventional housing. We are going to do, and we're going to make improvements for the property, and there's a need. From what I'm hearing tonight, there's a huge need for major improvements. The roadway system has problems, the pedestrian walkways have problems, stormwater is a problem, and those are all items, from a development standpoint, they'll be corrected as we go through the development to process and develop that property. So I think the Planning Commission understands that, because this is what you guys look at and understand. But for the laymen who aren't in the land development industry, they may not understand that, that those are going to exist as they are, and they're going to have to be addressed through the land development process, whether it's R2 or R3 zoning.
Chad, can I ask you a question? Because I think this is something that keeps coming up.
Yes.
When you talk about an income restricted and attainable housing project,
Yep.
has the developer looked at all at what that median income would be set at?
Oh,
Troy
can
HFL.
talk about it.
I've headed all of our affordable housing projects in the center region. We've actually brought more affordable housing units to the center region than any other developer. We are local, and as Chad has said, we do bring a great product to market. We have great management companies, but to address the rents are typically no more than 30% of the average median income that's coming into the unit, and those rent restrictions are typically at 20, 40, 50, or 60% of the average AMI of the area. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the average AMI of Patton Township is around $64,000.
Right, so you're looking at people earning up to 60% of that would be living there. And, as Chad mentioned, part of the land development process is addressing all the traffic impact studies. It's just as Tofttree's done, Crossing is doing it, all of those additional intersections. It is not just Clearview Avenue and Waddle Road. PennDOT will require it, the township will require that we will look at other intersections as well. So that is something that gets addressed. And, when we looked at this property and looking at the comprehensive plan, that corridor appears to be wants to be something else. And we know that there's a historic neighborhood there, and it's a lovely neighborhood. But as the planners of a decade or more ago, and those that are looking at now, that Waddle Road corridor wants to be something else, whether it's multi-family housing, whether it's commercial. I think someone mentioned that this property was identified as being commercial in, the future planning for that site. So whether it's a multi-family property that has some affordability component to it, it's higher density. Typically, these types of developments are looked at highly by planners because it has a lower carbon footprint, it's local, it's close to public transit, it's close to shopping, and these are things that city planners and the affordable housing PHFA and other entities look at. They want to make sure that they're walkable, they have public transportation, and that's why this property meets a lot of those needs, and we think it would be a great addition. But whether it's this property or this project, that corridor wants to be something else, and that's what the planners are looking at. And you mentioned there's another one coming out. I suspect you're going to see more of that along that corridor.
I just have one question, just to be clear. So I think you went over this, Chad, at the last meeting. So if it stays R2 or R3, I believe you just said some hypothetical scenarios for R2, versus R3 at our last meeting. So I don't know if you could just go back over some of those.
Well, what we looked at, whenever I was asked by my company to look at this property, whether it's a viable tract, the first thing I did is looked at and realized that from an R2 standpoint, there's not a huge opportunity for tons of opportunity for development. The 9 single-family homes, I apologize, I'm sorry. 9 single-family homes is pretty much what we'd be able to get there with the R2. Not that that's the worst thing, but from an investment standpoint, that may not be what we want to do, right? So we started looking at it and said, what can we do if this was rezoned? I noticed that it was abutting the R3 neighborhood. I said, okay, well, with the R3 neighborhood, if it does get rezoned, here are some of the things that we can do. And I believe the best yield for the property would be an apartment building. So based upon the simplicity of the ordinance that indicates that it's based upon a certain amount of land, there's a certain amount of area that's required per dwelling unit, and that's how I kind of work my way backward to come up with the 31 units, the same as Leslie had done with her analysis. And then I looked at the property and said, okay, well, what's the biggest footprint we can put on the site based upon maximizing that footprint? And we've looked at an option where we've maximized that footprint on the site, again, just to make sure that we're making an appropriate investment into this property as we move forward. Then I looked at it and said, okay, well, how many parking spaces do you need? Where would we put our stormwater facility? So I looked at all of those items, and we looked at it and said, okay, this could be viable if it's rezoned and we can get this yield in here. It's kind of the maximum yield. And with that being said, is we looked at options to say, okay, do we put the driveway where it is? Do we move the driveway to the other side of the property? Do we do some underground parking under a building? Do we keep all the parking on the outside? We're looking at the best value for our investment if we develop this property, if it goes to the R3. So that's what I think I indicated.
Yeah, the last one. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. I'm sorry. Is there someone with their hand up on?
There's a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
It says, I have a question about the R2 to R3 rezoning. I support it, but it is possible to leave or reduce the parking minimums for the property. I believe reducing parking minimums would alleviate traffic issues. Will a reduction in parking minimum for the HFL property be a consideration?
I'm looking at something on parking, and we've done studies because we've had to address parking needs, and they're usually, every municipality has an ordinance for parking. All of our affordable properties typically show much fewer traffic than a traditional market rate or student property has. I mean, a lot of people are using the public transit, and the new project we're doing over on Trout Road, 62 and over, and we're already getting a lot of interest in it because there's a CATA bus stop there, and a lot of people are telling us that they probably won't be driving at all. So we've done studies that are affordable projects, and we find that the number of traffic is actually lower than you would traditionally see. So,
and adding to that, if there is a request for less parking, they would obviously have to, again, go through the municipality. We would have to make the request. We understand all that. For instance, in College Township, they have a provision in their ordinance that essentially says based upon it being classified as workforce housing, then we got a benefit in not building as many parking spaces as the ordinance states, but we had to plan for those through the development. So just in case something changes, the building changes use 10 years, 20 years down the line, whatever, there's an area identified to say, listen, in order to meet the ordinance at this time, we would convert this area that we've set aside for the future parking. So, all of those advantages we would look at just like any other developer would. If you're building a single-family home, you're going to look at some advantages as to how can I have cost savings now. It's not going to be a negative effect in the future, and we'll look at the same thing from a development standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments on Zoom? Are there any other comments from the general public? Yes, sir.
Robert Probst again, 153 Bolton Avenue. I wanted to answer Sharon's question from earlier about the Bryn Apartments. They're only 3-story apartments, so they're not very tall. So the possibility of a 60-foot building, in my opinion, would be very out of place with the adjacent properties.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on Zoom? Anyone else from the general public? Anyone else from the planning commission? Oh, yes,
I
Leslie.
do have one thing. Nicole found this for me. So the definition of essential services is the erection, construction, alteration, or maintenance by public utilities or municipal or other governmental agencies of underground or overhead gas, electric, steam, water transmission or distribution system, collection, communication, telephone exchange, supply, or disposal system.
Very well done.
I have a
Andrea.
question. So
Yes.
if we were to build this building, where would be the points of entry and exit?
So that's a land development question. That's
Okay.
not something we would talk about. That's something the developer would come in with a proposal to the township on the land development plan.
Okay, and just further thinking through, would there be possibilities of putting diverters so that people couldn't go through the neighborhood?
So that is all something that could be discussed. I know College Township has done that recently. They put speed bumps in up on Oak Ridge in that neighborhood because they have a lot of cut-through traffic down Shamrock.
Right.
I know State College Borough at a time had put some diverters in to keep people off of the neighborhoods adjacent to the university off of Park Avenue. That's all something that can be discussed as part of the traffic impact studies and what we look at.
Yeah, okay.
Can those things be discussed even if it doesn't pass into R3?
Yeah, if this stays R2 and nothing happens with this property, or not very much happens with this property, the township can look at it. I've taken notes tonight about, we need to probably sit down, we're gonna start our capital improvement plan process. We need to sit down and maybe look at doing something out there because the traffic is a concern. Certainly, it's the Clearview Waddle intersection right now that we're hearing about, but you know, there's also cut-through traffic in those neighborhoods, and that's not good. We don't want to see that in a neighborhood. So, yeah, I've jotted down that we need to take a look at that and see what we might be able to do and talk with our traffic engineer about that.
I was kind of thinking at where the gentleman said about where you turn at Sheets and go on Clearview to Waddle, maybe if we could divert that so that it does go to the proper channel, down Colonnade or even 99 to Waddle.
I don't know that we can do that level of diversion,
Yeah.
but there's things we can do to do some traffic calming. We can look at some other things that make it unattractive to cut through, right? We all in the center region have ordinances that require interconnection of streets because that's a public safety issue.
Right.
However, it's interconnection of a public street that doesn't give you a clear shot. It has to be inconvenient because we don't want people cutting through neighborhoods, right? That's a concern. So we can look at all of that, and I mean, I think we definitely need to take a look at what's going on out there. The right turn comment I thought was an excellent comment because that's one we've discussed at a staff level as well. So, I mean, I think regardless of what you guys decide tonight, this is something that at a staff level, we need to look at a little more about the traffic and then speak with the supervisors.
Amy, just one question more for guidance for us.
Sure.
Why would we vote to rezone in advance of solving the traffic issues?
So that's a Pennsylvania issue. So we can't consider sort of all of the land development issues because it's still speculative at this point. So if you vote to rezone, then we sort of have all of these other things that have to happen during the land development process. In the case of this property in particular, some of those problems are pre-existing, right? The traffic being the biggest pre-existing problem. So that stays regardless of whether this goes R3 or if it stays R2. So that's something to think about. Another thing to think about, and this is probably more the question for you guys as the Planning Commission when you're considering this, Waddle Road has an identity crisis. Not a crisis, but an identity issue, because at one end it is more residential, at the other end it is more commercial, and it has the I-99 interchange. So how do you want to see, and that's what they were looking at with the future land use plan, how do you want to see this area change? Do you want to see it change? Do you want to see more of a buffer? How do you want to accommodate what's here now versus what's coming? Those are things you should be thinking about as you're looking at this request, not necessarily the traffic, which is something we'll have to address during land development of anything, be it R2 or R3.
Okay. You know, I think something else to consider is if it stays R2 and R3, we cannot dictate what goes in R2 versus R3. We're looking at this from a pure zoning lens, per se. Okay, is there any other comment from the Planning Commission or the general public or Zoom? Okay, so we have to take action on this.
So I will say this, you do not, there's no timetable associated with this. So if you want to have more discussion, you certainly could table action on this and have this on your agenda in September. If you feel that you have some questions, it would be helpful if you gave us those questions that we could find answers for you between now and September. If you think that you're ready to take action on it, you can take action on it tonight, and then you would refer it to the Board of Supervisors with your recommendation. But you don't have to do a thing tonight if you don't want to. There is no timetable. So if you don't feel comfortable or you have questions, I would encourage you to wait a month and to give us those questions and let us track that down, and we can have another conversation.
Okay, I'm going to withhold my thoughts till last. Is there a consensus on the Planning Commission to go, to either go to a vote or hold off to ask more questions and, maybe even get some thoughts from even the board as well? Sharon?
I kind of want to hold off till September.
Jim?
I'm a toss-up.
Okay. Ellen?
I always have questions, so.
Okay.
So I'll have a few.
Debbie?
I'd like to wait till September.
Okay. Bill?
I'm good to move forward now, but it sounds like we've got people that need more information.
Okay. Brian?
I could also move forward now.
Okay. I'd like to wait on this at this time and to put it back on the September meeting. I think it's imperative for the board to hear some of the same things that we heard tonight, because I think that even though we were looking at an R2 to R3 rezoning request, I think some other core things have come to light with the traffic, quote unquote, and I think that that's important to have them hear some of the thoughts. And I think the most important thing is for people that live in this area to re-communicate to the board, because we just advise them. They actually get the final vote on if this is rezoned or not. So I'm going to vote to state some questions and put this back on the agenda for September.
Okay, and just so you know, it won't go to the Board of Supervisors until you're done.
Right.
But perhaps when you make your Planning Commission report, you can give them a sense of what we discussed.
Well,
here.
right, and what I'm sincerely hoping is, it's great for me to communicate the list of things that I have, but I think it's important for the people that live in this community to tell the people where the buck stops with the vote on the board, what the thoughts are that you told us tonight.
Right, and so
as well.
they'll have the opportunity to do that when it's on the board agenda.
Yes, and I will be at the meeting on the 16th giving the Planning Commission report.
It won't
too.
be on the meeting, it won't be on the agenda next week.
Right,
If
but
you-
I can,
You can bring it up.
I'm
but-
going to bring it up,
But the
yes.
residents should wait until it's on the board's actual agenda to come
Right.
to the meeting. They can send, certainly communications, which we'll share with them, but you want to wait and have your voice at the actual meeting when it's discussed after you guys have
Yes.
finished your discussion.
Yes, I didn't communicate that clearly.
I just want to make sure so no one doesn't
No.
think that the board's going to do something with it on next week. They won't.
Okay, so we've decided to wait on that, to put it back on the Planning Commission agenda for September. It will not be on the board agenda in August. I will give a summary of this discussion at the August 16th board meeting. And if there's no further comment, we will move on to agenda item 6, which is the status report on pending items, which we have none. And then other business is number 7, We just had some highlights from the CRPC meeting on July 3rd, 2023. They went over the final draft of the regional growth boundary. They drafted a model EV charging infrastructure ordinance. They went over a 2020 census result, and the Patton Township Board of Supervisors, they adopted a code on property maintenance and fire code. Also, they went over the Fillmore Store sewage planning model. I'm going to wait.
Yeah.
I've been told worse about how I talk. Anyway, number 3, then they also approved a temporary use permit for the Acres project, and they appointed someone to the Alder Run Engineering at the Patton Township's consulting engineer. Does anyone want to say about that? I'm sorry, I didn't want to rush through that.
No, I'll just say that Michelle Murrow, who is now our consulting engineer, she actually was Patton Township's assistant public works director and engineer from 2003 to 2005. So she's been great to get back on staff.
Oh, okay,
She's a great
wonderful.
addition.
I went over her name because I wasn't confident in how to pronounce it, so thank you, Amy.
Sure.
I taught math for 15 years. Okay, is there anything else anyone would like to bring up on the Planning Commission before we have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
One thing I want to bring up.
Yes.
Debbie is not able to do the October 11th report to the Board of Supervisors. Valerie did send out an email in hopes that somebody would fill that place.
I can do it, pretty sure. Let me double check real quick.
Yeah, I replied I was out of town.
Yeah, I'm in town. I can do it. October 11th.
Yeah, and if something changes, Ellen, I'm available.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Do a duo.
What's that?
Do a duo.
Hey, I might need backup on the 16th. Anyway, can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I motion that we adjourn.
Can I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. We are adjourned.